Hey everyone, welcome into another edition of No Holds Barred here at the Toronto Sun. Rob Wong and Postmedia wrestling writer Jan Murphy with you as always. WWE SummerSlam goes this Saturday and Sunday at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey, and our guest today will be on that card facing off against someone that has been a thorn in his side for months now in Karrion Kross. Always great to chat with Canada's own Sami Zayn. Sami, nice to speak with you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We'll talk about SummerSlam. We'll also talk about Raw and SmackDown coming back to your home province of Quebec next month. But wanted to start with the passing of Hulk Hogan. I think everyone in the wrestling world still coming to grips with that. And I think for wrestling fans our age, for the three of us here, at one time or another, we probably said our prayers, ate our vitamins, and possibly tried to rip off a T-shirt that we were wearing. I know the company you work at, pro wrestling itself, would probably not be where it is today without Hulk Hogan. What comes to mind for you when you think about the impact that he had on the industry?
I really just think about the impact he had on myself more than anything because, undoubtedly he was my favorite when I was a kid. My earliest memories, and I've said this in other interviews when they've asked me about, what made me fall in love with wrestling or at what age did I know I wanted to wrestle or whatever, the types of questions you sometimes get when they're asking you about your childhood relationship with wrestling. And for me, I always said that it's like one of my earliest memories. I don't even have there's not even a timestamp I could really put on it. It's just, it seemed like it was always there. My earliest memories were really watching it with my dad. And I just have this vivid image of Hulk Hogan after a match, sweaty and maybe bloodied. And he had just gone through so much. And then just, all the poses and the adulation out of the crowd. I think that spectacle is what really just drew me into wrestling to begin with. So he was my guy as early as I knew wrestling. He was the guy and he was my guy. So he was really my introduction to all of this. So, when I hear about his passing and, I won't get into all my feelings. That's, I don't want to burden anybody with all that stuff, but, that's the big takeaway for me is just what an impact he had on my childhood and thereby my life, because I don't know if I'd be doing this. I don't know if I'd be doing this today if not for that.
I don't know that anybody would be doing this today if not for what Hogan did at the time that he did it. I think Paul Heyman summed it up best when he said Hulk Hogan wouldn't be on Mount Rushmore. He is Mount Rushmore. I truly believe the wrestling world would not look anything like what it looks like today if not for Hogan coming in at the time he came in and capturing that lightning in a bottle that reached people that, had never been reached before.
Yeah, and I think we have a tendency to kind of it's a recency bias where we just look at where things are kind of here and now and go like, oh, look at like today's stars and look how big this is and we just kind of take it as a given that this is what it is. But if you you guys are about my age, and if you lived it at that time and saw the metamorphosis firsthand, you understand the impact of it a little better. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's easy to look at the guy now, or, he's obviously passed away now, but as a 70-year-old man and, this, that, and the other that had been said about his reputation and everything like that, it's easy to look at him and be like, whatever. Now, but you have to understand context and time, the time in which he existed and what things were like then, and it makes it all the more impressive that it turned into what it turned into.
The comparable for me, Sammy, is Wayne Gretzky. I watched Wayne Gretzky. He changed hockey. He brought it to new markets and made it globally famous.
Right.
Now everybody today, like Connor McDavid and Sidney Crosby, but no one was Gretzky.
That's what I'm saying, and they're right. Like, these are unbelievable players, but if you lived through Gretzky, you understand what it meant.
Yeah.
And it's like I say this all the time about the Beatles. They're one of probably my favorite band ever. And like now, if you listen to a gajillion bands, they're just another band. But you have to understand what it meant in 1963 when nothing like that had come out, and they changed the face of music and pop culture as we know it. You know what I mean? So I don't know. So it's almost, this is more a commentary on history than it is on anything else. um, and the way we perceive history and all that kind of stuff. But anyways, you're asking me about my takeaway with it and my feelings about it. It makes me reflect about my own childhood more than anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know Jan and I spoke about that last week, referencing WrestleMania 18. He and I were both there. We didn't know each other, but we were both in attendance for that. And it just had a massive impact that we were even there as wrestling fans and look back on it quite fondly that night in Toronto. Talked about SummerSlam coming up this week. Karrion Kross will be your opponent. It's been a really fun journey for me to watch this develop, and it's been a slow burn, if you will. And I know that's something that resonates with a lot of fans that, just trying to watch this storyline develop and how it's going. What are your expectations and thoughts going into this match on Saturday?
Well, it's funny because for as much of a slow burn as it has been, like I've kind of been loosely attached to him for almost the entire year. I'd have to go back and see when our first interaction is, but it would probably be, towards the beginning of this year. So it really is something that's been slowly simmering for, I don't know, probably close to 6, 7, 8 months. I really don't know. But all this to say, despite that, I kind of wish there was a little bit more recent steam on it. I know things have kind of picked up in the last month with he and I. But to watch the way fans have sort of got behind him in a way recently is really interesting to me. Really interesting because he hasn't been given a whole lot. It's just been like a minute back here, a minute back there, sprinkled over, several months. And that slow burn, as you put it, has kind of, I don't know, made people a lot more intrigued and just really want to see him get more of an opportunity. And I'm interested I like the story that we're telling here. I typically like stories about broader issues, not just, you punched me in the face and I punched you in the face and now I'm going to get even with you. This is like it has, these are morality issues and talking about, his worldview as a character is about how everyone is sort of corrupted and everyone is evil deep down. And I represent sort of the opposite as someone who tries to do his very best to fight the good fight and is doubling down on being incorruptible, even in the face of like temptation and shortcomings, like this thing about the world title being the backdrop for all of it, about being unable to achieve this big goal. And the issue being that perhaps I'm like too good to do what needs to be done to like this life lesson that's kind of being taught, like, oh, well, you got to get your hands dirty if you want to get ahead. And the character kind of rejects that. So I think it plays to much deeper issues. And those are the kind of stories I like to tell. I wish we had a bit more time to like lean into that really. But as I said, it has been a slow burn, but I wish we could really like, get our hands in the dough on that one. Cause I think that's kind of been the subtle that's the undertone and what's kind of underpinning the whole story. But I wish it was a little bit more at the front of it all,
Right.
Sammy, it's important in wrestling. I've said this many, many times, and it's common knowledge. Helping get someone over can be an important thing. I mean, this could be a career-defining weekend for Karrion Kross because he's getting the Sami Zayn rub, if you will. You could help propel this, his career in a different direction. When you think back, is there a time, when somebody helped you, like, in the same vein that you have this opportunity to help Karrion?
Yeah, countless people have done that for me. I mean, that's just the nature of the business. You work with someone, and by working with them, and it's always going to be a collaboration. It's not one person carries you through the whole thing. You still have to, hold up your end of the bargain. But yeah, I mean, I can't even begin to count the number of people that have helped me. Nobody gets here on their own, and anybody who tells you that they did this and it was their hard work. I mean, not to get into a whole different, philosophical outlook on life, but nobody does anything on their own. And certainly not in this business. This business, you're reliant on so many people helping you, believing in you and propelling you. It's you can't even. It's immeasurable. Everyone I've ever been in the ring with, in some form or another, has helped me. Um, and obviously, there are people who've really helped me or who've really believed in me. Um, yeah, but I can't even begin to list them all now. One that just jumps out at me a lot is like the Briscoe brothers in Ring of Honor. Um, I mean, you're going back to 2007, 2005 now.
Wow.
I want to get into all of the history, but that was one of the few that really jumps out at me is like, man, uh, I was in a make or break situation, myself and Kevin Owens, Kevin Steen at the time. And, if those guys hadn't been so gracious and giving and just about the performance and not about themselves. And I think that's a big mindset difference that really, whatever. I'll go into a rabbit hole all that, but my point is when it's about the art, when it's about that night, and it's about making whatever you're doing the best it can be, and you're not thinking about where you are on the totem pole and where that person is on the totem pole, and when it's just genuinely about what you're doing right there, that's a special thing, and that's where the magic is made. And without those guys having that mentality and that approach to working with Kevin and myself back in 2007, again, I don't know if I would be here. So it's one of the many domino effects, but that's one that jumps out at me off the top of my head. But again, countless times, Vince McMahon had to believe in me enough to put me on television and give me those opportunities. And Hunter had to give me those opportunities in NXT. And granted, if I don't deliver the goods, you don't get those opportunities, but somebody has to believe in you and see the talent in you to get you there. So I don't know if, I'll do what I do with Karrion Kross, but I can't take, if he turns into like the big star tomorrow, it's not going to be like, oh yeah, that Sammy really got him there. I mean, I'm one small part in hundreds, if not thousands of people who've helped him along the way. Because there's been hundreds, if not thousands of people who've helped me along the way too.
Absolutely. Last one for me, Sammy. As I mentioned before, SmackDown coming to Montreal August the 8th, and it'll be Monday Night Raw in Quebec City at Videotron Center on August the 11th. I want you to take me all the way back when we're talking about, IWS in Montreal, you and Kevin running around. Just quickly, what were those days like, when you think back to it? Because I don't think a lot of people know a whole lot maybe about the Canadian wrestling scene.
Well, it's really, again, you asked me earlier about Hulk Hogan and we started talking about the context of the time and the landscape of the time. And that's so hard to go back and remember when you're talking about things because we always have a tendency to compare them to how things are now. But it was like the only thing I can say is it was like being on an island. And there was a groundswell of guys who were influenced by late ECW and then became wrestling or just wrestling diehards that were watching late ECW. And that was a kind of a gateway into Japanese wrestling and all that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden we're starting to devour all these different styles and starting to try to do that themselves. Right. I mean, that's really, I think that's anybody at the most basic level. You hear a song and then you want to learn to play guitar. And it was that a bunch of kids basically in a garage band is how I would compare it to. But there was Kevin, myself, and there were, a few other people that all had the same mindset at the time because Quebec was a really funny place at the time. It was really just like all these promotions. And it was sort of this unwritten thing. Like if you worked for one promotion, that was all you were allowed to do. And there was a handful of guys. I remember having my mindset even before I had started wrestling is like, no, I want to work everywhere. I want to work for all of them, and there were guys that I started to meet that had that same mentality and that same approach of just doing it everywhere and getting as good as possible. And I don't know, just trying to do their best. But we were doing it in what felt like a vacuum. There was no first of all, there was no YouTube. The internet was around, but it was, wrestling information was passed around on message boards and you couldn't just upload matches and stuff like that. It was just the world was different. Media access to media was different. People were still trading VHS tapes at that time. You know what I mean? Like we weren't even at the DVD. IWS started selling DVDs, and it was like, whoa, we're on the ground floor of technology here. We're ahead of the curve. And they tried to live stream things, which was ahead of the curve. So they were doing interesting things. But I'm just trying to describe to you, like, we were a bunch of people dropping each other on our heads, doing this like new style of wrestling that was really different from what had been on Quebec independent shows in front of like 50 people at the time. And we were all doing it in this little vacuum. And then one day we kind of got to go to the States and show what we were doing. And it blew people's minds a little bit. And we were so shocked because we thought like we were doing this every week in front of nobody. And I remember distinctly the first match we had in the US, right before we went out, I wasn't satisfied with what we had put together. And I remember turning to Kevin, I said, but we're not doing anything new. Not realizing like nobody had seen any of this stuff. And when we went out and do it, people's minds were just being blown. So I'm only telling you this story to just speak of how isolated we were and what a vacuum we were in, but how in a weird way that was important. Like you just create differently when you're not a part of something that's already going on, when you're just like alone in your bedroom doing it by yourself, like creating art or writing songs or doing whatever you're doing, fantasizing and creating whatever artistic vision. Like when you're alone, doing it alone in a little room, it's very different than when you're doing it as part of like a bigger scene, because what's going to influence you is different. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great analogy when you talk about a band, because it's like maybe you've played this song 100 times, but somebody's going to be hearing it for the first time. So,
exactly. Yeah. Like when you've worked on a song, even in your bedroom and you're writing it and you're a kid or whatever, and then you play it maybe in your local bar, in your local whatever forever, and it's like you just know you're already bored of the song. But then one day you get a gig and it's like 2 hours over and you're going from Montreal to Ottawa and you're playing some bar in Ottawa and people are like, what is this? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you had been creating it somewhere else, like the creation process would be different. It's hard to describe, like I can't create the ideas that come to me now are a product of where and when I am now in WWE. I couldn't create this way when I was still trying to make my name. And I couldn't wrestle the way back that I did back then when I was trying to make my name. It doesn't work now. You know what I mean?
For sure.
It's just different. I don't know. It's too complicated to get into all now. But the short answer is that it was just a really interesting time where you were alone on an island with a bunch of your friends, just creating stuff that you didn't even know would be special. But it's still more or less what Kevin and I are doing on TV to this day. A lot of the same moves and a lot of the same philosophy.
Yeah, it's cool to see. Look, Sami, as always, we really appreciate the time, man. Always insightful chatting with you. Best of luck this weekend at SummerSlam. Thanks for this.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.